Okay, so now it's the time for learning Microsoft Azure Functions. I hope maybe you have heard about Azure Function because this is one of the most popular service of Microsoft Azure Cloud. If you ask me what is Microsoft Azure Functions, then I'll say that it's nothing but a solution for running small piece of code. I mean, every time every developer knows that a function is nothing but a piece of logic. And Azure Functions are small piece of code which are running on the cloud, independent piece of code which can be deployed on the cloud and then it can be running there. Now, why we are learning Azure Functions in microservice training? Well, the answer is Azure Functions can be one of the coolest way to treat it like a microservice. So it can be a microservice. How and where we can use this thing, that's what we are going to discuss actually. Azure Functions supports wide variety of programming languages like C#, JavaScript, Java, PHP, Python, and all this. Suppose if you're not a programmer and if you want to use a scripting languages like PowerShell and Shell, then also you can use this thing here. The biggest advantage of Azure Function is actually it comes with the serverless kind of a model. I mean, we all know that up to this point, whatever services we have seen in Azure belongs to cloud computing. But this is something which is serverless computing, which actually saves a lot of cost. When you go with the serverless computing of Azure Function, you are getting an added advantages like you're going to have a per second billing. You will be charged only for the amount of time your code is executing. And if you compare it with the traditional cloud computing concepts like platform as a service or infrastructure as a service, your cost is going to be almost 80 to 90% less in Azure Functions compared to normal applications and app service plan. Suppose if you want to use Azure Functions as an app service plan, that option is also available. Sometimes clients prefer app service plan based Azure Function models because Azure Functions with the serverless has some limitations. One of them is like you cannot run a long running functions into that. Every time when you're dealing with a function, every function needs to be executed with the help of some kind of a trigger. So there are chances that you're going to have some existing Azure services or app services which are actually going to trigger the function app logic. The moment that trigger is going to happen, function app is going to execute the piece of logic, and once the execution is done, the response or the outcome of that particular logic is going to be returned back to the service. This is how Azure Function works. I think we will understand this better with one small demo of this. So let's try to deploy Azure Function on our Azure portal. I'm there in my Azure portal and I'm going to click on Create Resource where we have an option for Function App. Creating resource is a really simple thing, so without wasting time, I'll just go and create a function app. I'm going to select my subscription. I'm going to select my resource group which I've created earlier for this course. And then I'm going to give some function app name. Let's say I'm giving this is MSMT Func app. One function app can have multiple Azure functions inside that. This is my Func app. What kind of deployment I want to do? I can make a function app code-based deployment or containerized deployment also. As of now, I'm choosing that is going to be in .NET. The version for the .NET, I'm selecting 3.1. You can select 6 also if you want. And the region for this function app, I'm selecting Central US. Below that, they're asking me that what kind of operating system and what kind of plan you're looking for. If I want to choose serverless and save my cost, I can go with consumption serverless plan. Or otherwise, as I mentioned, you can go with the app service plan, or you can go with some premium plans, which are a function specific premium plans, which are available here. You can search about this on the Microsoft official documentation and get more details about this, which one is perfect for you. I'm going to go on with consumption serverless functions right now, and then I'm going to click on next. The hosting section is showing me that it's going to create one new storage account also for this function app. I'm fine with that. And then in the networking and monitoring, I do not want to change. But I want you to observe that because I want to see that when exactly function is getting executed and how many times it's going to get executed. In the monitoring section, I'm going to keep my monitoring on. This is going to configure one additional resource which is application insight for my function app, and that's how it is going to work. I'm going to click on next and I'm going to click on review plus create. This will take few moments and then this function app is going to be deployed. Once it is deployed, we'll try to create multiple functions inside this function app. Okay, the deployment of function is completed. Now we are going to click on go to resource, and inside this func app, we can see that left side we have a section which is functions. This function app is not having any functions as of now. And if I want to create multiple functions, I can create this thing with one of the editors like Visual Studio and all, or maybe I can create this thing inside the browser itself. I'm going to click on plus create, and then right side is showing me that we have an option for develop in portal itself. That's what I'm going to select, and I'm going to select my first simplest function, which is HTTP trigger. You can see right now there are so many triggers which are available here. Now, no matter which trigger you select, every trigger is going to define how exactly the function is going to get called. Like this HTTP triggered function is showing me that a function that will run whenever it requires an HTTP request, responding based on the data in the body or query string. It means this is a function which is actually going to work like an API because it's going to have HTTP based communication. We all know that every API can do ultimately get, post, put, delete kind of operations, and that's what this HTTP trigger function is going to do. I'm going to select HTTP trigger function, and I'm going to just scroll down. I'm providing the name of the function, which is HTTP trigger 1. Authorization level for this is by default function, but I'm going to change it to anonymous. And then the moment this configuration is fine, I'm going to click on create. This is my first function, which is based on HTTP trigger, and if it is created inside the browser itself, I'll get some place where I can write some code. I can have some logical association with this function, and then I can run this here itself and test it here. I'm going to click on this code plus test section, and it's going to load that C# code which is based on .NET framework. You can see I got one simple code here. It is having one simple C# task which is asynchronous, and inside this async task we have some lines of logical code. If you focus on this logical code, it's ultimately an HTTP triggered function, so it's trying to get the value from a query string. The name of the parameter is name, and if it is not there in the query string, it's trying to get this thing in the request body. From whichever area, from query string or maybe from request body, if you are passing some value of the name, they are going to convert that into JSON. They're going to reserialize that object, and then if I have some value in that, this function is simply printing hello and that name. Suppose if you are not passing any parameter, then this is simply going to show you this message which is mentioned here. This one function is actually HTTP based HTTP trigger function. Now if I want to see whether this is running or not, I can click on this button which is on the top, which is get function URL. I can copy this URL, and then I'm going to click on the new tab of my browser, and I'm going to paste this. When I do this thing, this is showing me that this HTTP triggered function executed successfully. It means I am actually doing one execution, but because I'm not passing any parameter, it's showing me this message. Now if I do slash, and if I pass on one more parameter with this, let's say I'm specifying that I want to pass on that name parameter, and in this case I have to pass on like question mark name equals to Maruti. Now this is the way we pass on the parameter into our API also. I'm going to hit enter, and if I do this thing, it's showing me hello Maruti, this HTTP trigger function executed successfully. In short, this is showing me that yes, this function is running fine. Now this is the moment I want to raise one question for all of you to think about. Guys, this is one function which is having some logical code inside this. This is Azure function, but can I say that this is one API? The answer is yes. This is an API which is actually doing get and post kind of operations. If I click on this function.json file, which is a configuration file for this function, I can see that this is actually supporting two methods, get and post. If I want to support put and delete kind of operations, I can do that also. So this is nothing but one API which is directly running on the cloud. And the coolest thing is, I do not need to pay any continuous amount every month for this function. Every time when I execute this, I have to pay only for the execution time. Like just now, I have executed this function 2 times. First time when I executed this was actually not having any parameter. Second time I have executed this with parameter. And if I want to go for the costing part of this, I only have to pay for 2 executions. This one function is actually running independently on Azure Cloud. And then this is obviously independently deployable and testable. Now if all these things are true, can I say this is a microservice? Well, the answer is yes. Every function is actually a microservice. Maybe it's an API, may not, but every function is actually a microservice. And this is independently executing here. It is running fine. It is actually having all the configurations and requirements which are matching with the microservice architecture. Now I'm going to show you this thing in the next section, in the next video, that how we can use some more functions and how this is actually going to match up with the microservice architecture. Thank you. So now once we have an idea about this functions and the function app, we already know that we have one function which is HTTP triggered function. Now let's deep dive into some triggers, and then we can understand that how this is going to be implemented as a microservice. I'm going into my storage account which got created automatically with this function app. I mean, while deploying the function app, I hope you remember that there was one storage account which got created with that. Now in this case, I'm going inside this storage account and I want to create one container. The storage account container is going to be there here inside this account. So let's say I'm giving a name of the container like media files, and then inside this I'm going to specify that this is going to have a public access level which is private. I'm going to click on create, and this new container is going to be created inside this particular storage account. Inside this media files kind of a container, I'm going to see that, okay, right now we do not have any images. I'm sure you know that containers are going to have blob data inside that. So whatever images we are going to up are going to be a blob type, and then that's what we are going to use here. Now I'm going back to my function app, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one more function. We are creating a new function, but this time I do not want to go with the HTTP triggered function which is like an API. This time I'm going to change this to a function trigger which is Azure Blob storage trigger. You can see we have plenty of triggers available here. Trigger defines how the function is going to be executed, and Azure Blob storage trigger is telling me that this is a function that will run whenever a blob is added to a specified container. We already have a blob storage container. So if I'm going to add any blob files into that, this function is going to get triggered with that, and that's how it's going to connect with that. I'm going to select this, I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to give a name whatever by default is there. They're asking me what will be the sample path. Sample path should be the name of my container actually. So I'm specifying that this is actually going to be media files. The moment I do this, this function is going to associate with that particular media files container which is there in the storage account. The storage account connection is already established with this name, so I'm okay with that. I do not want to change it. If you want to associate with some other storage account, you can click on new and you can configure the connection once again. I'm going to click on create, and this new function is going to be created inside the same function app. Now, because this is not an API, this is going to work on some kind of a file upload kind of a trigger, which is a blob file right now. Now this code is a very straightforward code. Whatever file upload we are going to do, the name of the file and the size of the file is going to be printed here in the log. Now let me do one thing. In order to check whether this is working or not, I'm going to keep my log section open. This is going to show me all the logs of this particular function execution. It's showing me connected, and this is the time I'm going back to my media files container which I have created, and I'm going to upload at least 1 or 2 images inside this. I'm going to browse my computer for the images. I'll find some images in my pictures. I'll upload some image, and then I'm going to wait for this. If I upload this image, it's going to show me that this image is uploaded here. Now if you see, this is a very smallest and simplest function of only one line. But right now also, this is a function which is working based on some trigger, and every time when you upload a file there, it's going to show you the logs here. This simple connection between the storage account and the function is actually telling you that the triggers are working fine. Same way, we have more than 20 plus triggers which are available in these functions, and we can use whichever trigger we want, and it's going to work fine. Now, right now also, this is a one small function. So if I ask you the same question, is this API? The answer is no. This time this is not an API. This is not an API which is working on get, post, put, delete kind of thing. But the point is this a microservice? Logic wise, yes, this is also a microservice because it's just having some kind of a piece of logic which is independently running, and it is still working on some kind of a triggers. Now, every Azure function is nothing but a microservice because it's just focusing on one single piece of logic which is associated with that. If you want to try more with the serverless microservice kind of architectures, I have one very useful link here which is actually showing you serverless microservice reference architecture from Microsoft itself. This link is going to be shared with you, or you can just type this link. Serverless microservice reference architecture is available on the official Microsoft documentation, and you can see this architecture. This is actually a microservice architecture, but all the microservices are created in a form of functions. If you compare this one with the previous microservice architecture which I have shown you, then you'll relate and understand this way, that this is actually something which is my client application. Client application is going to have API gateway. This is my API gateway, which is API manager. We are going to see API gateway in the coming video very soon actually, so that you understand how API gateway works. Right side part is actually having some microservices, and then we have something which is allowing me to do the communication between microservices, which is known as event grid. We are going to see event grid and service bus kind of things also in this course. And then we have few more microservices which are treated as functions, and this is icon of the logic app. This one reference architecture is actually showing me different functions as independent microservices which are deployed here. And somewhere the Active Directory is taking care of the authentication authorization. In short, this is my identity provider. And that's how it is working. I strongly recommend all of you to go through this reference architecture, and then you can study the scenario which is there. This is a really important. Also, the most important thing is the implementation code is available on GitHub. You can just go to this GitHub repository where everything is step-by-step implemented, as well as you have all the steps, how they have performed the steps and how they have created this configuration. This is going to help you to understand the configuration and to understand the microservice architecture understanding. Now, this is something which is serverless microservice reference architecture, which is actually using Azure Functions with that. Thank you.